The warning lights on the bridge flashed red as Captain Lee Minho watched the readings on his screen. Something had gone very wrong with their jump through the experimental wormhole. The New Horizon was not where it should be. Kim Taeyang. "What's our status?" Lee asked his chief engineer. "Sir, we're in one piece, but our navigation system shows we're nowhere near our planned destination," Taeyang replied, his fingers dancing over his control panel. "The wormhole threw us much farther than expected." Dr. Park Gina looked up from her science station. "Captain, I'm reading massive energy signatures all around us. This isn't empty space." Lee nodded calmly. "Show me what we're dealing with, the HFY." Main screen lit up with a sight that would have sent most species into panic. Hundreds of dark angular ships surrounded them in perfect formation. Each vessel was 3 times larger than the New Horizon, their hulls covered in weapon ports that glowed with threatening energy. "Those are warships," Lieutenant Choi Nari said from her communications post. "And they're pointing everything they have at us." The crew of 847 humans looked at the alien fleet with the same expression they might wear while studying an interesting cloud formation. Nobody screamed. Nobody ran. Nobody even raised their voice. "Fascinating design," Dr. Park said, adjusting her glasses. "Look at how they've arranged their weapon systems, very efficient." "The power output readings are impressive," Taeyang added. "Their energy systems must be quite advanced." On the largest alien ship, Admiral Vextar stared at his screens in confusion. The strange vessel had appeared from nowhere, and his fleet had immediately surrounded it. This was standard procedure. Most species would be broadcasting surrender, offers by now, or at least showing signs of fear. Instead, his sensors showed the alien ship was scanning his fleet, not looking for escape routes or weaknesses, but studying them like scientists examining a new species of plant. "Sir," his communication officer reported, "the alien vessel is sending us a message." "Put it through," Vextar ordered. The screen showed a being unlike any the Valdorians had encountered. The creature was smaller than a Valdorian, with smooth skin and strange hair growing from its head. It wore a simple uniform and sat calmly in what appeared to be a command chair. "Greetings," the being said in perfect Valdorian language. "I am Captain Lee Minho of the Earth vessel New Horizon. It appears we have accidentally entered your space. We apologize for any inconvenience." Vexitar's jaw dropped open. The alien was apologizing for entering their space uninvited? Most species either begged for mercy or declared their intentions to fight to the death. This one was treating the situation like a minor social mistake. "You are surrounded by the Imperial fleet of the Valdorian Empire," Vextar announced in his most threatening voice. "Submit immediately or be destroyed." Captain Lee tilted his head slightly. "I see. Could you clarify what submission would involve? Are there specific procedures we should follow?" The question was asked with genuine curiosity, as if Lee was asking for directions to the nearest spaceport. Vextar found himself momentarily speechless. On the human ship, the crew continued their work with calm efficiency. Navigator Han Jiwoo plotted 17 different escape routes while simultaneously calculating the fleet's formation patterns. She did this not because she was afraid, but because it seemed like useful information to have. "Captain," Dr. Park said, "I'm detecting at least 7 different species among the alien ships. This appears to be a multi-species empire." "Interesting," Lee replied. "That suggests a complex political structure. Lieutenant Choi, see if you can learn more about their communication protocols." Choi nodded and began analyzing the alien transmissions. Within minutes, she had identified the basic command structure and begun mapping their hierarchy. Back on the Valdorian flagship, Admiral Vextar was growing more unsettled by the moment. His threat had been ignored not out of defiance, but because the humans seemed genuinely more interested in learning about his empire than worrying about their own survival. "Admiral," his sensor officer reported, "the alien ship is still scanning our fleet. They've mapped our weapon systems, shield frequencies, and power distribution networks." "Are they preparing to attack?" Vextar asked. "No, sir. They appear to be cataloging the information, like they're building a database." This was unprecedented. Every species the Valdorians had encountered followed predictable patterns when faced with superior force. They either surrendered, fought, or tried to negotiate. These humans were doing none of those things. They were studying. Captain Lee stood up from his chair and straightened his uniform. Admiral Vextar, we would be happy to discuss this situation further. Would it be possible to arrange a meeting? We're always interested in learning about new civilizations. The request was made with the same polite tone someone might use to ask about meeting for coffee. Vextar looked around his bridge at his confused officers. In 800 years of expansion, the Valdorian Empire had never encountered anything like this. You wish to negotiate? Vextar asked carefully. We wish to understand, Lee corrected. Our species finds knowledge valuable. If we're going to share this region of space, it would be beneficial to understand how your empire functions. The casual mention of sharing space made several Valdorian officers step backward. This small ship with its tiny crew was discussing sharing space with an empire that controlled thousands of worlds. The audacity should have been insulting, but somehow it wasn't. The humans seemed to genuinely believe that any two groups of intelligent beings should be able to work out their differences through reasonable discussion. Dr. Park had finished her initial analysis of the alien broadcasts. Captain, I believe we're dealing with a hierarchical military structure, probably with civilian oversight. Their communication patterns suggest a highly organized society with strong central authority. Good work, Doctor, Lee said. That information will be useful for establishing proper diplomatic contact. He turned back to the screen where Admiral Vextar was still staring at him, with what appeared to be complete bewilderment. Admiral, I notice your ships have been maintaining the same formation for quite some time. That must require excellent coordination and training. Your fleet discipline is impressive. The compliment was genuine, spoken with the appreciation of one professional recognizing the competence of another. Vextar found himself nodding automatically, before remembering that he was supposed to be intimidating these aliens, not accepting their praise. Your ship will be boarded and searched, he announced, trying to regain control of the situation. Your crew will be questioned. Of course, Lee agreed. Should we prepare any specific documentation? We have complete records of our mission, our ship specifications, and our crew roster. Would that be helpful? Once again, the human's response was perfectly reasonable and completely unexpected. Most species would either refuse boarding or demand to know their rights. This captain was offering to help with his own interrogation. Kim Tae-yang looked up from his engineering station. Captain, should I prepare the ship for visitors? I can have detailed technical manuals ready if they're interested in our propulsion systems. Good thinking, Tae-yang, Lee replied. Let's make sure our guests have access to any information they might need. Admiral Vextar closed the communication channel and turned to his officers. What in the name of the 7 moons are we dealing with? His tactical officer, a veteran of 50 conquest campaigns, shook his head slowly. I don't know, sir. They're not acting like any species we've encountered. They don't seem to understand that they're in mortal danger. Maybe they're just very brave, suggested another officer. No, Vexatar said quietly. Brave species fight back or make last stands. These humans aren't being brave. They're being practical. It's like they've already accepted that they're outgunned and decided to make the best of it. On the new horizon, the crew prepared for their alien visitors with the same calm efficiency they brought to everything else. They organized their records, prepared translation equipment, and even set up a small reception area in case the aliens were interested in cultural exchange. Do you think they eat similar food to us? Asked Dr. Park, genuinely curious. We'll find out, Captain Lee replied. First contact situations are always educational. As the Valdorian boarding shuttles approached, not a single human on the new horizon showed any sign of fear or stress. They waited patiently, ready to learn about their new neighbors and share information about themselves. Admiral Vextar watched the approach on his monitors, feeling more unsettled than he had in decades of military service. His empire had conquered hundreds of species, but they had never encountered one that treated potential conquest as a learning opportunity. The humans were about to teach the Valdorian Empire that there were more ways to be terrifying than anyone had ever imagined. The Valdorian shuttle bay was massive, designed to intimidate visitors with its size and the rows of armed soldiers lining the walls. Ambassador Song Ji-hoon walked down the shuttle ramp with the same calm expression he wore to morning briefings. Behind him, Dr. Yoon Si-won carried a simple briefcase and looked around with obvious interest. "Remarkable architecture," Dr. Yoon commented quietly. "The design suggests both practical function and psychological intimidation. Very efficient use of space." Song nodded as if they were touring a museum instead of being escorted by alien soldiers with weapons pointed at them. The Valdorian guards had expected many things. They had escorted trembling diplomats who could barely walk, defiant leaders who shouted threats until their voices gave out, and broken creatures who had already given up hope. They had never escorted visitors who asked polite questions about the metal alloy used in the corridor walls. Supreme Chancellor Kexmorth waited in the Empire's most impressive meeting room. The chamber was designed to dwarf visitors, with a ceiling that stretched up into darkness and walls covered in the banners of conquered worlds. The Chancellor's throne sat on a raised platform, surrounded by holographic displays showing the vast extent of Valdorian space. When the humans entered, they looked around with the same expression scientists might wear when examining an interesting geological formation. "Your Excellency," Ambassador Song said, with a respectful bow. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. I am Song Ji-hoon, representing the human species and the Earth government." Kexmorth had practiced his entrance speech for centuries. It was designed to crush the spirit of potential enemies and establish absolute dominance. He began in his most threatening tone. "I am Kexmorth, Supreme Chancellor of the Valdorian Empire, Master of 4,000 worlds and ruler of 200 species. Your pathetic vessel has violated our space. Your species exists only because I have not yet decided to end it," Song listened attentively and made a note on his tablet. "I see. Could you clarify the legal framework for space violations? We'd like to ensure we don't repeat the mistake." The question was asked with genuine interest. Song was treating the threat of genocide as a regulatory issue that could be resolved with proper paperwork. Dr. Yoon stepped forward slightly. "Your Excellency, if I may ask, how do you manage the administration of 4,000 worlds? The logistics must be fascinating." Kexmorth stared at the small human who had just asked about his empire's bureaucratic structure, while standing trial for his species' survival. "You dare to question me?" the Chancellor roared. "Oh no, Your Excellency," Dr. Yoon replied calmly. "I'm not questioning anything. I'm genuinely interested in learning. Managing an interstellar empire of that size represents one of the greatest organizational achievements I've ever encountered. As an anthropologist, I find it academically exciting." The human was giving him a professional compliment. Kexmorth, who had been preparing to crush these aliens' spirit, found himself unexpectedly flattered. Song opened his briefcase and pulled out a neat stack of documents. "We've prepared some preliminary information about human civilization in case it's useful for your evaluation. We have economic data, technological specifications, cultural summaries, and population statistics." He placed the documents on the table with the care of someone submitting a business proposal. "We've also prepared some initial observations about Valdorian society, based on what we've learned so far. Would you be interested in reviewing them?" "Observations about us?" Kexmorth asked dangerously. "Yes, Your Excellency. For example, your empire appears to follow a standard hierarchical expansion model, similar to several historical examples from our own world. The use of intimidation as a primary diplomatic tool suggests a society that values strength and clear authority structures. Very logical, given the challenges of managing multiple species across vast distances." Dr. Yoon had pulled out his own tablet and was taking notes. "The architectural choices in this room support that analysis. Everything is designed to emphasize the power differential between ruler and subject. It's quite effective from a psychological standpoint." The two humans were analyzing the Chancellor's carefully crafted intimidation chamber like it was an exhibit in a museum. They weren't afraid. They weren't even particularly impressed. They were studying it. "You are not here to analyze us," Kexmorth said, his voice rising. "You are here because your species faces extinction. I could order your deaths with a single word." "That's certainly true, Your Excellency." Song agreed. From what we've observed, your empire has the military capability to destroy not just our ship but our entire civilization. That's quite an achievement in itself. He paused to make another note. Could you tell us more about your standard procedures? For species integration, when you encounter a new civilization, what are the typical options you offer? Navigator Han Jiwoo, who had been quietly observing from the back of the room, stepped forward. Your Excellency, we've calculated approximately 17 different escape routes from your space, but they would require several years to execute. Given that time frame, it seems more efficient to establish diplomatic relations instead. She said this with the same tone someone might use to explain why taking the highway was faster than backroads. The casual mention of escape plans should have alarmed the Valdorians, but Han delivered it as simple tactical analysis. Kexmorth looked around his throne room at his advisors. They were all staring at the humans with the same bewildered expression. These aliens were treating their own potential extinction like a scheduling problem. You speak of extinction as if it were a minor inconvenience, the Chancellor said slowly. Not minor, Your Excellency, Song replied. But it is a predictable outcome of certain policy decisions. If extinction is the result you prefer, then we'll adapt accordingly. If you'd prefer a different outcome, we're happy to discuss alternatives. Doctor? Yoon looked up from his tablet. From an anthropological perspective, species extinction is always unfortunate because it represents a loss of unique cultural knowledge. But it's also a natural part of galactic evolution. We wouldn't take it, personally. The human was discussing the death of his entire species with the same academic detachment he might show toward the extinction of dinosaurs. Kexmorth felt something he had never experienced in centuries of rule. Uncertainty. What do you want? From us, he asked, abandoning his prepared script. Information, primarily, Song answered. We'd like to understand how your empire functions, what your long-term goals are, and how a species like ours might fit into your plans. If integration is possible, we'd like to understand the process. If not, we'd like to know what happens next. You're discussing your own enslavement, Kexmorth pointed out. We're discussing potential policy outcomes, Song corrected gently. Slavery, integration, extinction, and peaceful coexistence are all possibilities. We'd like to understand which one you prefer so we can plan accordingly. Han had pulled out a portable holographic projector and was setting it up on the table. Would it be helpful if we shared our preliminary analysis of Valdorian military capabilities? We've identified several interesting innovations in your fleet design. She activated the projector, which showed a detailed three-dimensional model of a Valdorian warship. Every weapon system, shield generator, and power coupling was labeled in precise detail. How did you obtain this information? Kexmorth demanded. Standard. Sensor analysis during our initial encounter, Han replied. Your Admiral Vextar was very cooperative in positioning his ships for optimal scanning. We've been able to extrapolate most of your basic military technology from those readings. Dr. Yoon was studying the hologram with obvious appreciation. The integration of offensive and defensive systems is remarkably elegant. Whoever designed these ships understood the importance of redundancy and modularity. The humans were complimenting Valdorian military technology while casually revealing that they had completely analyzed it within hours of first contact. They had turned a display of Valdorian power into a classroom presentation. Kexmorth sat back in his throne, trying to process what was happening. Are you trying to demonstrate that you're not afraid of us? Oh, we're quite aware of your capabilities, Your Excellency, Song assured him. You could destroy our ship, our world, and our entire species without significant effort. That's not in dispute. We're simply trying to gather information so we can make informed decisions about how to proceed. And if we decide to destroy you? Song shrugged slightly. Then we'll send a message to Earth with our findings. Other humans will find it educational. Death is just another form of data collection. The Supreme Chancellor of the Valdorian Empire, ruler of 4,000 worlds and conqueror of 200 species, sat in his intimidation chamber and felt afraid. Not of human weapons or human threats, but of human composure. These beings discussed their own extinction like it was a research opportunity. They analyzed his empire's power while acknowledging their own helplessness. They faced annihilation with curiosity instead of fear. For the first time in 800 years, Kexmorth wasn't sure what to do next. The humans had somehow turned his own throne room into their laboratory, and they were studying him like a particularly interesting specimen. Chancellor Kexmorth stood before the massive viewing screen in his war room, surrounded by his highest-ranking military advisors. The humans had been too calm, too analytical. It was time to show them what real power meant. "We have selected a target," he announced to the assembled commanders. "A human colony world called New Eden, population 50,000. We will destroy it completely and broadcast the destruction to their ship. That should break their unnatural composure." The Valdorian fleet moved through space like a dark cloud, their weapons charging as they approached the small human settlement. Advanced sensors had already mapped the colony's defenses. There were none, just farms, homes, schools, and a small spaceport. On New Eden, Governor Shin Yura received the emergency transmission with the same calm expression she wore during budget meetings. The message was simple: evacuate everyone within 2 hours or face total destruction. "Attention all citizens," she announced over the colony's communication system. "We have received a mandatory evacuation order from the Valdorian Empire. All evacuation protocols are now in effect. Please proceed to your assigned assembly points in an orderly fashion." There was no panic in her voice, no hint of fear. She might have been announcing a routine safety drill. Captain Lim Do-hyun of the colony transport Peaceful Dawn was already running pre-flight checks when the announcement came through. His ship could carry 15,000 people, and there were 2 other transports in the system. The numbers worked out perfectly. "All evacuation teams to your positions," he broadcast to his crew. "Standard procedure, people. Children and elderly first, then essential personnel." In the colony schools, teachers calmly guided their students to the evacuation shuttles. 8-year-old Oh Suman dropped her favorite toy as they walked to the landing pad. Her mother, Oh Hyerin, knelt down and spoke softly. "We have to leave the toy here, sweetheart." "Can't we take it?" Suman asked. "Not this time, but we can make a new one when we get to our new home." Suman nodded and kept walking, her small hand in her mother's. She didn't cry or complain. She had learned from the adults around her that sometimes things happened that you couldn't change, and the best response was to adapt. Mining Director Bae Kyung was coordinating the evacuation of the industrial sector. His teams were systematically shutting down equipment and uploading data to the transport ships. Even in the face of annihilation, they were trying to save as much as possible. "Upload all geological surveys to the main computer," he instructed his team. The mineral data might be useful for establishing the next colony. Dr. Kang Sulgi, the colony's chief geologist, was actually excited about the approaching destruction. "This is a rare opportunity to study the energy output of Valdorian weapons," she explained to her assistant while packing her equipment. "We should set up sensors to record the bombardment." Engineer Ryu Jae-hyun was already calculating the blast patterns they should expect. "Based on the size of their fleet and the energy signatures we're reading, I estimate they'll use concentrated plasma bombardment. The thermal bloom should be visible from 3 star systems away." On board the Valdorian flagship, Admiral Vextar watched the evacuation with growing amazement. He had ordered the destruction of hundreds of worlds, and he had never seen anything like this. "Sir," his sensor officer reported, "the humans are evacuating in perfect order. No pushing, no fighting, no attempts to take more than their assigned weight allowance." "What about their military?" Vextar asked. "They don't have one, sir. No weapons, no defense platforms, nothing. They're completely helpless." Vexitar studied the evacuation feeds. Children walked calmly to the ships. Adults helped each other carry supplies. Nobody was screaming or crying or begging for their lives. It was the most orderly disaster response he had ever witnessed. "They know they're about to die," he said slowly. "Yes, sir. They've acknowledged the 2-hour deadline and are working to meet it." Governor Shin was walking through the empty streets, checking that everyone had evacuated safely. She stopped at the small park in the colony's center, where a memorial statue honored the first settlers. With careful precision, she removed the memorial plaque and packed it in her bag. "History should be preserved," she said to herself, then walked toward the last evacuation shuttle. As the final transport ship lifted off from New Eden, the Valdorian fleet moved into bombardment position. On the flagship, Chancellor Kexmorth opened a communication channel to the New Horizon. "Captain Lee," he announced, "you are about to witness the price of defying the Valdorian Empire. Watch as your colony burns." Captain Lee's image appeared, on screen showing the same calm expression as always. "Thank you for the advance notice, Your Excellency. We have scientific instruments recording the event. The data will be very valuable." Kexmorth cut the communication and gave the order. "Begin bombardment." The Valdorian fleet opened fire with everything they had. Plasma beams, particle cannons, and fusion missiles rained down on New Eden like the wrath of angry gods. The planet's surface erupted in chains of explosions that could be seen from orbit. Buildings vaporized. Mountains melted. The very atmosphere caught fire as the bombardment continued for 20 minutes of systematic destruction. When it ended, New Eden was a ball of molten rock glowing against the darkness of space. On the New Horizon, the entire crew watched the HFY destruction in silence. Not the silence of grief or shock, but the silence of people making careful observations. "Remarkable energy output," commented Dr. Park, making notes on her tablet. "I estimate they released approximately 4,000 terajoules of energy in that bombardment." Kim Taeyang was analyzing the weapon signatures. "Their plasma beam technology is quite advanced, much more efficient than our current designs." Captain Lee opened a channel to the Valdorian flagship. "Chancellor Kexmorth, thank you for the demonstration. We now have a much better understanding of your military capabilities." Kexmorth appeared on screen, expecting to see broken humans weeping for their destroyed colony. Instead, he saw the same calm faces as before. "We destroyed 50,000 of your people," he said incredulously. "Yes, Your Excellency. Fortunately, we were able to evacuate everyone in time. The material losses are significant, but manageable. We appreciate that you gave us adequate warning." "You're thanking me for destroying your colony?" "We're thanking you for allowing us to save the colonists," Lee corrected. "The advance notice showed considerable consideration on your part." Dr. Yoon appeared beside the captain. "Your Excellency, could we ask what type of weapons were used in the bombardment? The energy signatures were fascinating, and we'd like to understand the technology better." Kexmorth stared at the humans who had just watched their world die, and were now asking for technical specifications about the weapons that killed it. "You're not angry?" he asked. "Should we be?" Lee replied. "You demonstrated your power exactly, as you said you would. We received valuable data about Valdorian military technology, and we saved all 50,000 colonists. From our perspective, this was a successful exchange of information." Navigator Han had already calculated the cost analysis. "Rebuilding the colony will take approximately 18 months and cost about 2 million credits. The scientific data we collected is worth considerably more than that." Engineer Ryu was still excited about the energy readings. "The thermal dynamics of the bombardment were incredible. We recorded temperature spikes of over 10,000 degrees Celsius. The plasma containment technology must be remarkable." No. The Valdorian ship, the bridge crew was staring at their screens in stunned silence. They had just destroyed a world, and the humans were discussing it like a successful science experiment. "Sir," the communications officer whispered to Admiral Vextar, "they're broadcasting the evacuation footage to other human colonies. They're using our attack as a training exercise." Indeed, Governor Shin was already preparing a detailed report on the evacuation procedures, including recommendations for improvement. The destruction of New Eden had become a case study in emergency response protocols. Captain Lim was reviewing the transport efficiency statistics. "We can improve loading time by 12% if we adjust the boarding procedures," he noted. "The next evacuation should go even smoother." Little Osuman was drawing pictures of their new temporary home, while her mother helped other evacuees settle in. She had already forgotten about the toy she left behind. There would be new toys. At the next colony, Chancellor Kexmorth closed the communication channel and slumped in his command chair. He had destroyed an entire world to break the human spirit, and they had thanked him for the learning opportunity. His military advisors stood around him in confused silence. In 800 years of conquest, they had never encountered anything like this. Species were supposed to break when you destroyed their worlds. They were supposed to surrender or seek revenge or at least show some emotion. The humans had done none of those things. They had evacuated efficiently, recorded data during their world's destruction, and immediately begun planning how to do better next time. "They're not afraid of us," Admiral Vextar said quietly. "No," Kexmorth agreed. "They're not afraid of anything. They just adapt and keep going." For the first time in his long reign, the Supreme Chancellor of the Valdorian Empire felt genuinely frightened. The news of the human encounter spread through the Valdorian Empire like a virus, but not in the way Chancellor Kexmorth had expected. Instead of stories about their great victory, whispered rumors spoke of something far more disturbing. In the Bime, military barracks on Valdor Prime, soldiers gathered around tables in hushed conversations. Sergeant Draktar, a veteran of 30 conquest campaigns, spoke in low tones to his squad. "I heard from my cousin on the flagship," he said, glancing around nervously. "These humans watched their own world burn and asked for technical specifications about our weapons." "That's impossible," another soldier replied. "No species acts like that when you destroy their home." "That's what makes them so frightening," Draktar whispered. "They don't act like any species we've ever met." Similar conversations were happening throughout the Empire. The humans were becoming known as the Cold Ones, beings who faced death with the same expression they might wear while reading a technical manual. Imperial psychologist Morketh had been studying the human recordings for weeks, and his report to the High Council was deeply troubling. "These beings appear to have evolved beyond normal fear responses," he explained to the assembled leaders. "They don't experience terror, panic, or despair the way other species do. Instead, they treat every threat as a problem to be analyzed and solved." "But they must feel something," insisted General Torvex. "All living beings fear death." "Not these humans," Morketh replied. "They acknowledge death as a possibility, but they don't let it control their behavior. It's as if they've accepted that death is just another form of data collection." On the New Horizon, the human crew continued their studies with the same calm focus they brought to everything else. Dr. Park had compiled a detailed psychological profile of Valdorian behavior patterns based on their interactions so far. "They're heavily dependent on fear as a control mechanism," she explained to Captain Lee. "Their entire power structure relies on other species being afraid of them. When they encounter beings who aren't afraid, their system breaks down." Medical Officer Jung Hanna was examining Valdorian biological data they had collected. "Their stress hormone levels spike dramatically when they can't predict behavior patterns. They're actually more frightened of us than we are of them." Tactical Officer Ko Youngjae had wargamed hundreds of scenarios for potential conflict. His analysis was characteristically thorough and emotionally neutral. "In a direct military confrontation, we would lose decisively," he reported. "However, our psychological impact on their command structure creates interesting strategic opportunities." He displayed a series of statistical models on the main screen. "If current trends continue, we estimate a 47% chance of internal political instability within their empire within 6 months." Captain Lee studied the projections with interest. "Explain your reasoning." "Their system depends on predictable responses from conquered species," Ko replied. "When species don't respond predictably, it creates uncertainty in their decision-making process. Uncertainty leads to poor choices, which leads to reduced confidence in leadership." Navigator Han had been analyzing Valdorian patrol patterns throughout their space. "They're repositioning fleets to monitor human-occupied areas, but they're not attacking. They appear to be afraid of what might happen if they engage us further." The observation was accurate. Throughout Valdorian space, fleet commanders were receiving conflicting orders from their superiors. Some wanted to destroy all humans immediately. Others wanted to study them further. The indecision was creating chaos in the normally efficient Imperial command structure. On the industrial world of Kelvon, the local Valdorian garrison commander was dealing with an unexpected problem. The native Malari, a species that had been enslaved for 40 years, were asking uncomfortable questions. "Why do we obey them?" asked Malari worker Sithra during a private conversation with her fellow laborers. "The humans didn't obey when they were threatened. Why do we?" It was a simple question, but it struck at the heart of Valdorian control. For decades, the Melari had accepted their enslavement because they believed resistance was hopeless. The humans had shown that beings could face superior force without surrendering their dignity or independence. Similar conversations were happening on dozens of worlds. The warrior species called Corvathians, who had fought a bitter war against the Valdorians before being defeated, began requesting copies of human tactical assessments. "These humans lost a battle and called it a learning experience," said Corvathian war leader Bethak. "They treat defeat as data. What if we had approached our war that way?" The questions were spreading faster than the Valdorian government could control them. Species that had accepted imperial rule for centuries were suddenly wondering why they had never simply ignored Valdorian threats. In the imperial capital, Emergency Counselor Vorthak called for immediate action. "We must destroy all humans immediately," he declared during a closed session of the High Council. "They're disrupting the natural order. If other species start thinking like them, our empire will collapse." But Intelligence Director Zephys had disturbing news to report. "Our deep space sensors have detected human settlements on over 400 worlds throughout the galaxy," he announced. "They've been exploring and colonizing for generations, always careful to avoid contact with other species. Then they planned this encounter?" Chancellor Kexmorth asked. "Unknown, Your Excellency, but their exploration pattern suggests they've been studying our empire for over a century. Every human colony is positioned to monitor our trade routes, military movements, and communication networks." The implications were staggering. The humans hadn't stumbled into Valdorian space by accident. They had been watching, learning, and preparing for eventual contact. Captain Lee confirmed their worst fears during their next communication. "Your Excellency," he said to Chancellor Kexmorth, "we should clarify something about our presence here. The New Horizon wasn't lost in a navigation accident." "What do you mean?" Kexmorth demanded. "We were sent to make contact with your empire. Earth has been aware of the Valdorians for 112 years. We've been studying your expansion patterns, your technology, and your social structure." Dr. Yoon appeared beside the captain. "We have comprehensive files on Valdorian history, including detailed analysis of your conquest methodology and projected expansion patterns. It's quite fascinating research." "You've been spying on us?" Kexmorth asked. "We prefer to call it anthropological study," Dr. Yoon replied. "Your empire represents one of the largest social structures in the galaxy. Naturally, we wanted to understand how it functioned." Engineer Kim Taeyang joined the conversation. "We've also been developing countermeasures for your technology, just in case diplomatic contact didn't go well. Standard precautionary planning." The casual mention of military preparations sent shockwaves through the Valdorian command structure. The humans had been watching them for over a century, studying their weaknesses and preparing for this moment. "What do you want from us?" Chancellor Kexmorth asked, abandoning any pretense of being in control of the situation. "Initially, we wanted to establish peaceful contact and learn more about your civilization," Captain Lee replied. "However, our economists have run projections on your current imperial model." Ambassador Song appeared on screen with a tablet full of calculations. "Your empire will collapse within 57 years regardless of any action we take. The mathematics are quite clear. The resource requirements for controlling 4,000 worlds exceed the sustainable output of your tax base," Dr. Yoon added, helpfully. "It's a common problem with rapid expansion models." Ko Youngjae displayed a series of economic projections. "We estimate civil wars will begin within 30 years, followed by complete political fragmentation. The historical precedents are quite consistent." Chancellor Kexmorth stared at the humans who were calmly discussing the inevitable destruction of his empire as if they were analyzing weather patterns. "You're predicting our collapse," he said slowly. "We're observing probable outcomes based on historical data," Song corrected. "Empires of this size and structure follow predictable patterns. We're not making threats, we're sharing analysis. Captain Lee leaned forward slightly. Which brings us to our proposal, Your Excellency. We'd like to help you manage your empire's transition to a more sustainable model. Our economists believe it's possible to restructure your government to avoid the worst of the coming collapse. And if we refuse, then we'll wait, Lee replied simply. 57 years isn't very long from our perspective. We'll be happy to help the successor governments establish more stable systems. The Supreme Chancellor of the Valdorian Empire, master of 4,000 worlds, and conqueror of 200 species, realized that he was looking at beings who had already calculated his empire's future and were offering to help him die with dignity. The humans weren't threatening conquest. They were offering consulting services for inevitable collapse. It was the most terrifying thing anyone had ever said to him. The Valdorian High Council chambers had never been so quiet. For the first time in 800 years of expansion and conquest, the Empire's leaders sat in stunned silence as they processed the reports from their encounters with humanity. Chancellor, Kexmorth reviewed the intelligence files spread across the massive conference table. Each document contained more disturbing information about the humans and their capabilities. They have colonies on 400 worlds, Intelligence Director Cephas reported. Every single settlement is positioned to monitor our trade routes, military movements, and communication networks. They've been studying us for over a century. But they never made contact until now, added General Torvex. They could have established diplomatic relations decades ago. Why did they wait? Dr. Morketh, the Empire's chief psychologist, had the answer. Because they weren't ready. They needed to understand us completely before making contact. These humans don't take actions until they've analyzed every possible outcome. Emergency Counselor Vorthak slammed his fist on the table. Then we destroy them now, before they can implement whatever plan they've been developing. It's too late for that, Zephas replied quietly. Our deep space monitoring stations have detected massive movement in human space. Hundreds of ships are heading toward our borders. An invasion fleet? Chancellor Kexmorth asked. Unknown, Your Excellency. The ships don't match any military configuration in our databases. They appear to be transport vessels. On the New Horizon, Captain Lee was reviewing the final preparations for what humans were calling the Contact Protocol. It was a plan they had been developing for decades, based on careful study of Valdorian psychology and imperial structure. All colony ships are in position, Navigator Hahn reported. We have diplomatic teams ready to establish contact with 47 different species within Valdorian space. Dr. Park was coordinating with human anthropologists throughout the galaxy. Our cultural analysis teams are prepared to offer technical assistance to any species that requests help with governmental restructuring. Ambassador Song was finalizing agreements with several Valdorian subject species who had already requested human consultation. The Malari want help establishing representative government. The Corvathians are interested in our military analysis, techniques. Even some Valdorian worlds have sent private requests for economic advisors. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of conquering the Valdorian Empire, the humans were going to help it evolve into something more sustainable. They would offer their services as consultants, teachers, and advisors to any species that wanted help building better societies. Captain Lee opened a communication channel to Chancellor Kexmorth for what would be their final formal negotiation. Your Excellency, we're ready to begin implementation of our assistance program. Kexmorth appeared on screen, looking older and more tired than he had just weeks earlier. What assistance program? The one we discussed, Lee replied patiently. We're offering to help your empire transition to a more sustainable model. Our preliminary consultations with various species have been very promising. You're talking to our subject species without our permission? We're talking to any species that requests consultation, Song corrected, joining the conversation. Sovereignty is based on consent, not conquest. Any group of beings has the right to seek advice about how to govern themselves more effectively. Dr. Yoon appeared with his inevitable tablet of data. We've identified several promising models for imperial restructuring. A Federation system would probably work best, given the diversity of species involved. We have extensive experience with multi-species governmental structures. Ko Youngjae displayed strategic projections on his screen. The transition could take anywhere from 10 to 30 years, depending on how much resistance we encounter from entrenched power structures. We're prepared for either timeline. Chancellor Kexmorth realized he was watching the systematic dismantling of his empire, conducted with the same calm professionalism the humans brought to everything else. "You're destroying everything we've built," he said. "We're helping it evolve," Captain Lee corrected gently. "Your current system is unsustainable. You can either guide the change or have it forced upon you by economics and demographics. We're offering to help you choose the first option." On Valdorian worlds throughout the Empire, human consultation teams were already at work. They didn't arrive as conquerors or liberators, but as helpful experts offering practical advice about governance, economics, and social organization. On the former slave world of Malaris, human advisor Dr. Chen Mirai was teaching the natives about democratic decision-making processes. "The key is establishing institutions that can resolve conflicts without violence," she explained to a gathering of Malari leaders. "Every voice needs to be heard, but decisions still need to be made efficiently." The Malari were fascinated by concepts like voting, representation, and civil rights. Ideas that had never occurred to them during 40 years of Valdorian rule suddenly seemed obvious when explained by patient human teachers. On the warrior world of Korvath, military strategist Colonel Park Jae was reviewing their failed rebellion against Valdorian rule. "You fought bravely," he told the assembled Korvathian war leaders. "But you focused on winning battles instead of achieving strategic objectives. Let us show you how to plan campaigns that actually accomplish your goals." The Korvathians, who had spent decades brooding over their defeat, were amazed to discover that their rebellion could have succeeded with better planning and coordination. Even on some Valdorian homeworlds, local governors were quietly requesting human economic advisors to help them deal with growing resource shortages and social unrest. Governor Kethmore of Valdor Secondary received human economist Dr. Lee Ariam with desperate gratitude. "Our taxation system is collapsing," he admitted. Privately, "The cost of maintaining imperial control exceeds our planet's economic output. We need help, but we can't ask openly without being branded as traitors." Dr. Lee reviewed his world's financial records with characteristic thoroughness. "The problem is structural, not local. You're trying to fund a galactic empire with a planetary economy. We can show you how to build a self-sustaining system that doesn't depend on imperial subsidies." Within months, human advisors were working throughout Valdorian space. They didn't demand anything in return for their help. They simply offered practical solutions to real problems, delivered with the same calm competence they brought to everything else. The effect was devastating to imperial authority. Worlds that had obeyed Valdorian rule for centuries began implementing human-recommended reforms. Species that had never questioned imperial policies started demanding better treatment. Chancellor Kexmorth called an emergency session of the High Council to address the crisis. "They're destroying our empire without firing a single shot," he announced to his advisors. "Half our subject worlds are implementing governmental reforms based on human recommendations. Our own colonies are requesting human economic advisors. We could order them to stop," suggested General Torvex. "With what enforcement mechanism?" replied Intelligence Director Zephys. "3/4 of our fleet commanders have requested human strategic analysis of their operational efficiency. Our own military is consulting with them." Dr. Morketh had been studying reports from throughout the Empire. "The humans have identified the fundamental weakness in our system. We rule through fear, but they've shown our subjects that there's nothing to fear from us if they simply stop obeying." It was true. Across the Empire, species were discovering that Valdorian power was largely based on the assumption that it couldn't be challenged. Once that assumption was questioned, the entire structure began to crumble. On the New Horizon, Captain Lee was reviewing progress reports from human advisory teams throughout former Valdorian space. "The transition is proceeding ahead of schedule," Ambassador Song reported. "Most species are adapting to self-governance faster than we projected. The Valdorians themselves are requesting our help with their own governmental restructuring. Dr. Park was analyzing the psychological impact of their intervention. The fear-based control system collapsed as soon as people realized it was just a system, not a natural law. Once they understood that obedience was a choice, they started choosing differently. Navigator Han was calculating logistics for the next phase of operations. We have requests for advisory services from over 200 worlds now. We'll need to expand our consultation program significantly. Captain Lee opened a final communication with Chancellor Kexmorth, who now held the largely symbolic title of Transition Coordinator in the emerging Valdorian Federation. Your Excellency, our initial consultation period is complete. How would you evaluate the restructuring process? Kexmorth appeared on screen, looking surprisingly relaxed for someone who had just watched his empire transform into something completely different. I have to admit, Captain Lee, your system works better than ours did. Our worlds are more prosperous, our citizens are happier, and our conflicts have decreased by 70%. That's the advantage of voluntary cooperation over forced compliance, Lee replied. People work harder when they're working for themselves instead of for distant masters.